Hi, hello to the Midweek Catch-up Webinar. Sorry for starting a little bit late, but we had a bit of technical issues. The discussion today is on the South African economy, well, especially the post-COVID-19 recovery of the economy. And well, at the moment, it's for all of us hard to see past the pandemic, but economists like Dawie Roodt, who's one of our panelists, politicians and academics are all coming forward with blueprints on what the economy should look like after COVID-19 and how do we get back not to the levels, well, that we're already in deep trouble in before the pandemic hit us, but before that. Well, as you know, I'm just going to go to a slide. There's the main protagonists with plans on the table is Business for South Africa, who came up what they call within a new inclusive economic future for South Africa. And then the ANC released what they call the discussion document on the reconstruction, growth and transformation, building a new inclusive economy in South Africa. What they do agreed on is that South Africa has come to a fork or a T-junction and that we need to go in either take one of these paths forward. There was also the proposal from the Chancellor of the University of the Free State, Bonang Mohale, that said that the opposing group should work together to come up with the best plan for South Africa. Some of the plans are quite controversial. The ANC talked about using pension funds to prop up Eskom, and there's even now a proposal from Finance Minister Tito Mboweni that the state may approach institutions to invest pension fund money. Well, to discuss this with us, we have two panelists with us, Dawie Roodt, Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, and Dawie specializes in government finance and monetary policy. And before I ask Dawie just to introduce himself a little bit, we've got Gerhard Papenfus. He's the Chief Executive of the National Employers Association of South Africa, or NEASA, and we hope he can give us a bit more clarity on jobs, what and how employers are dealing with what's going now with COVID-19. So Dawie, if we can just before we start, can we just ask our General Manager, Stuart Lohman? We've got a bit of a problem with the camera of Gerhard Papenfus, but he can hear us clearly, and so we just want to know, is everything okay, Stuart?
Excellent, thanks, Linda. Just quickly, can you share your screen, Linda? That's the only thing missing on the presentation side.
Oh, I know you do.
Before we get going, if new to the webinar, please let me know if you can hear my voice and see Dawie and Linda's faces. There's a little high five button you can push. When you see those high fives coming through, there we go, Linda. So it looks like it's coming through loud and clear. And then we also like to keep it very conversational. So there's a little questions drop-down menu on the control panel. If you put your questions in there, Linda can pass them on to Dawie or Gerhard as she sees fit. Linda, all good from our side there? Enjoy.
Okay, can you see the screen now, Stuart? Because you said you can't see my screen. Is that okay? So we've got Gerhard there. Gerhard, sorry for we have your picture. I hope you're happy with that one. And we've got Dawie. So Dawie, can we start off with you? You quoted as saying that the economy is in very, very deep trouble. Was this before COVID-19 and we are in even deeper trouble now?
Indeed, Linda, good morning to you and thank you very much for the invite. Yes, indeed, that is the case. And I think it's important for all of us to understand and to realize that the South African economy was in very, very deep trouble before this crisis. So if you allow me, maybe just 5 minutes to just give you a couple of highlights. The South African economy was in a so-called technical recession before COVID-19, even before we've heard of a place called Wuhan. The average South African has been getting poorer for the past 5 years. This is before BC, before Corona. The unemployment levels, as we all know in South Africa, were at horribly high levels. And the fiscal accounts were completely and totally unsustainable before the time already. And now it's the crisis, it's the financial, or it's the COVID crisis, and maybe just the important point that the current slowdown in economic activity is not because of the virus. It's important that we understand this. It is because of the measures that are being put in place to contain the virus. That's the reason why the world economy is going through a deep recession, and that's why the South African economy is going through, let's call a spade a spade. That's why the South African economy is going through a depression. The South African economy, based on my estimates, is likely to contract by approximately 10% this year. The average South African's income will fall close to 15%. The average South African by the end of this year, will be at levels in terms of income where we were last in 1981. 1981, we've lost 40 years. If we do everything right, it will take us approximately 10 years to get back where we were last year. The fiscal accounts have become completely and totally unsustainable. The fiscal deficit this year is likely to be about 15% of GDP. The debt levels will exceed 80% of GDP. And the only answer, and now you refer to the plan of the ANC, but the only answer to the crisis in which we found ourselves is for the state to cut back, and to cut back dramatically on state spending. And that's exactly what Tito Mboweni wants to achieve. He wants to reduce state spending, the discretionary part of that, by approximately 100 billion rand from this year to next year. Politically, I can't see how he's going to do that. I just don't think he's got the support in government to be able to stop this complete collapse in the fiscal accounts. And maybe a last comment before I hand over back to you, Linda. I think there are three issues in South Africa that are important. We don't have an economic problem. The problem is at another level. We have a political problem. And the first answer that we need to get is who's in charge of the ANC, because we don't know. There's always infighting and different messages that we're getting from the ANC. So we don't know who's in charge of the ANC. It certainly doesn't seem as if it is the president. So there's some sort of leadership conflict or resolution or some sort of conclusions that we have to get to, and we have to get clarity on who's in charge of the ANC, because that affects policy, and there's certainly not policy clarity in South Africa in terms of the economy. The second conflict is an ideological conflict. So what are we? Are we a bunch of communists? Are we trying to sort of contain state spending? Are we going to nationalize the Reserve Bank? Or, I don't know what the answer is. So there must be some sort of ideological answers to what sort of policies we're going to follow in South Africa. And thirdly, there must be a conflict in the ANC or in the tripartite alliance between whoever is in charge of the ANC and organized labor, COSATU especially, because COSATU today is basically representing the civil servants in South Africa. And one thing is for sure, we need to cut back on state spending, and that inevitably means we have to cut back on a wage bill, and that's going to be extremely difficult to do. So those are the three conflicts that needs to be resolved before we can really get to the South African economy. We are not in trouble, Linda. We are in very, very deep trouble. This is not a crisis. This is a crisis upon a crisis.
Okay, we're definitely going to discuss more of that. And if I can go to Gerhard. Gerhard, I've seen you said you are worried that the COVID-19 pandemic is used for a more radical approach by the ANC.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't think so. I'm not worried about it. I know it's what they do. It's not as if you know, you make a certain conclusion based on certain information. That's what they say. The president has said it himself that this pandemic poses a wonderful opportunity to correct the fault lines in our society, to get rid of the inequality. But what he's referring to is not to help the poor. It is to go after the white economy. That's as simple as that. It is the plan of the ANC now, and as well, and that's supported by Business for South Africa, because they're the guys that's really going to benefit from this plan. This is all aimed at this. Ramaphosa said radical economic transformation must underpin the economic future, and the plan of the ANC says that that BEE is organically wired into the plan's configuration. So we know that this is the future, and so this is very worrying. So we know that BEE has done a huge amount of damage to the economy, and it made a few people extremely rich and the rest poor. You cannot exclude a particular portion, and a very prominent and very important portion of the economy, and think you're going to succeed. You cannot exclude a particular portion of this country. If you want the country to succeed, we all have to collaborate. But this is not what they want to do, and it's very clear what their plans are.
Okay, I just want to invite the business community, please ask questions. I've been sent some questions by email asking me about jobs, and I think when it comes to jobs, Gerhard can probably give us some insight on how badly business is affected by COVID-19. Gerhard, do you have numbers of how bad it is?
Look, I think the jobs figures for the second quarter ending in June will give us more light. But there's a lot of figures that's been thrown around. Even Treasury has mentioned the figure of 2.5 million jobs, a figure of 3 million, as we have seen a figure of 3 million. Investec, I saw this morning, I think they said 1.1 million. I'm not sure, you know, and I think it's Busa that says last night, I saw a video, said 1.1 million formal sector jobs. So, you know, the impact on the informal sector, that we don't know. So it's anything between 1 and 3 million jobs. What I do know is a survey that NEASA has done has indicated the following. 15% of businesses that participated in the survey said they're not going to start up again. And we did the survey more or less the time that we went to level 3. 15% they not said that they're not starting up again. 65% said that they will start up, but they will cut back on jobs and remuneration. So that left 20% of the economy. And I think in NEASA is a mirror of economic activity. We've got 5% of our businesses are bigger business than SMMEs and small. Only 20% say we will continue more or less on the level that we had prior to COVID-19. 80% cut back. For 65% will cut back either in remuneration or in jobs, and 15% said they're not going to start up. I recently did a quick survey about amongst our managers in the 5 regions of NEASA, and we've got a very large legal team assisting companies with the labor law issues, and they told me that they are 50% of the time they spend in retrenchments at the moment. That's something that used to be 5% or 10% of NEASA's business. Currently 15%, 50%. That's huge. So our resources is stretched just to help businesses. And you know, businesses, if they retrenchment is really the last resort. When business it's very difficult for a businessman to tell workers that they're going to be retrenched. But when they get to that point that they realize there's no other way, it's always almost a bit too late, and then they need immediate assistance. So I can gather from what our guys do that that there's a bloodbath outside. I've recently had a resignation from one of our lawyers who says she just can't take it anymore. It's the tension, the stress on her. Retrenching all the time is just too much. So there is, I don't know what the figures are. I don't know the exact figures, but we'll see. But there's a big thing happening at the moment.
Dawie, you've been nodding. You want to come in there?
Yeah, I can. Let me give you a couple of numbers that I'm pretty sure of. Let me give you the numbers that I'm not sure of, but these are my estimates. I expect about more than 2 million job losses this year. 2.1 million, in fact, is my actual number. And I expect approximately 100,000 businesses to close down permanently. So 2.1 million jobs will be lost kind of permanently, depending on economic growth in future. So that's the number there. But more importantly, we have to understand that we already have more than 10 million people that are unemployed in South Africa. So by the end of this year, we're going to have 12 million people at least that are going to be unemployed. As a percentage of unemployment, that is close to 50% on the expanded definition. Now, there's talk of things like, for example, a basic income grant. If that should be implemented, a basic income grant, then you'll have to give a basic income grant to more than 10 million people. It's totally and completely unaffordable. Just to put some other numbers in perspective, already we have 18 million people, more, 19 million people, in fact, people receiving grants already from the state. And we have 2 million civil servants in South Africa. So you've got 21 million people that is directly dependent on the state for a monthly income. And in the private sector, you have 14 million people working. And of that 14 million people, 2 million people are probably going to lose their jobs. So we're talking about 12 million people effectively cutting 21 million people by way of the tax base in South Africa. So things are completely and totally unsustainable. And the only answer that we have in South Africa, if we want to fix this problem, and for some we, and of course it's difficult to fix this problem because of political reasons, ideological reasons, and so on. But the only solution, Linda, is to cut back and cut back quite dramatically on state spending. Inevitably, that means that you're going to get COSATU to get very angry at you. You're going to get the Communist Party getting very angry at you because a lot of civil servants must take a huge pay cut. They must take less salary home every month. That is really the only answer to this. But to cross that bridge politically is going to be extremely difficult to do. And if we are successful in doing that, and cutting back on state spending, real austerity. What we have currently is not austerity, by the way. It is, in fact, a hugely expansionary fiscal stance. But if we do succeed in cutting back on state spending, that will actually push the economy into a deeper recession in the short term. But it's become inevitable. So I'm afraid those sort of numbers simply do not add up anymore. And eventually, I believe that what this whole thing always ends the same. And that is with very high levels of inflation. Of course, the next step is probably going to be prescribed assets to the savers, to the pension funds, but eventually it's going to end up with very, very high levels of inflation. Fortunately for us in the short term, Lesetja Kganyago, who is still the governor of the South African Reserve Bank, is doing an excellent job, and he will try to prevent inflation from getting out of hand. But with these sort of numbers that we are currently working with, I can't see anything else but the very, very high levels of inflation eventually, and very high levels of inflation will eventually cut back on the real spending of the state. It will cut back on the civil servant's salary in real terms and the like. So either we do it, and we better start doing it very quickly, or the markets are simply going to force us to.
Okay, let's go to a couple of the questions. Pete Lowe's asked two questions. He said, well, first of all, who's the minority Gerhard is referring to? Let us not beat about the bush. Spit it out, he tells Gerhard. And then he also said there's an overlap between tax base and state employees, which skew figures. Gerhard, do you want to come in on what he asked you earlier, or the first question?
Yeah, it's minorities, whites are among the minorities, that's it. But coloureds and Indians are also among the minorities. But what we must understand, that there are millions of black people that are depending on the success of white business. So, when you punish white business, the blacks are suffering as well. So yes, it's I think there's an element of revenge in this, because it's not so sound economics. It goes against all the fundamentals in successful business and successful countries. But I think there's something, I want to just quote something, what the attitude behind this is. The Black Business Forum, which claimed that they conceptualized the South African affirmative action blueprint. The deputy president recently said, we are dealing with a solid economic architecture, and he's referring to the white economy. So strong, unless something drastic happens, you can't sabotage it. Now that's actually, it's a good thing to hear that that part of the economy is at least very strong, but you've got to bring it to his knees and start afresh. And he says that further, in the ruins of the old South Africa will have a chance to start all over to build a new economy. Now we know it's nonsense. Once you've built it, broken it, it's not going to be that easy, and that's an understatement. He says the coronavirus was a gifted chance, since black empowerment had so far failed, and they articulated the strategy of burning down the house in order to rid it of the mice. Now that's not only economic genocide; it even goes beyond that. So no, we thought 25 years ago we beyond the white-black language, but unfortunately, if you we'll have to address this issue directly, because this is going to severely hurt us. Now, Business for South Africa is very optimistic about this plan, because if you look at what these businesses look like, they will benefit largely from this infrastructure, their plans, because BEE will, for anyone to participate, BEE will be the thing. Now, you know, the corruption in South Africa finds its origin in BEE, I think. I mean, that is patronage from top to bottom, and on all levels. We will pay more for contracts. South Africa will get less. And, you know, if the state will play a bigger role. So, Dawie, everybody agrees you need a smaller state. What government envisages is a bigger state, because they say that the state must play a very important role in this new venture. It must be a public-private partnership. Now, we know what private means in the public-private partnership. It means if you're not BEE, then you won't be part of it. And SMMEs are family businesses. It's simply impossible to do that, and it's not going to happen. But you know, the plan refers to the pockets of excellence that exist in the state and in SOEs. Now, I don't know where they come from when they say that.
Okay, I just want to say that the view you were talking about the forum, a Black Business Forum, that is sort of a more radical view. That's not quite mainstream thinking. Dawie, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, Linda, I think it's important to sort of see through the noise a little bit as well. The ANC recently, as you know, issued their new plan, which isn't a new plan. It's a sort of a new kind of new plan, which isn't a new plan. And there are many plans. We're very good at making plans. Plans are just not being implemented. But more important for me is to understand what is going on in terms of flows in South Africa. And I think I did indicate that in terms of flows, that we ran out of taxpayers now. We ran out of capital. We've destroyed the existing capital that has been available. Like, for example, Eskom has been destroyed, and the South African Airways has been destroyed already. And the alternatives now is to start off getting your hands into the pots of gold that are left, and that's the pension funds, of course. And in the end, it always ends with very high levels of inflation. I do agree with some of the things. I don't like the continue always looking at things in terms of race in South Africa, but some of the things are certainly true that Gerhard is referring to. One is that we have this patronage called the ANC, and we think that the ANC, and I did mention a few minutes ago that the ANC, that we have to get some clarity on ideology in South Africa, but we have to understand is that the ANC uses the terminology, and they use the rhetoric of communist rhetoric and things like, for example, redistribution and exploitation. All those are words that are used by socialists and communists, but they're simply using that. It doesn't really mean anything to them, because the ANC has become an organization that simply lives off the state. It means that this huge patronage network that has been established need to be funded continuously. And if you understand that there's nothing to do really with ideology. Of course, a couple of guys are very ideologically driven, like Pravin Gordhan as an example. They are pretty much ideologically driven, but for most of the ANC, they exist simply to live off the state. If you understand that, then you realize it's not going to be politically possible for Pravin Gordhan, for Tito Mboweni to cut back on state spending. So it's become inevitable that the state will keep on getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they will try to get their fingers in whatever pots of money they can get their fingers in. And the solution to this, I believe, in the end, is only political. We don't actually have economic problems in South Africa. We've got political problems, a long list of that. And until we've solved the political issues and get answer to the political questions, until then, I'm afraid the South African economy will not be revived. We are, in the meantime, heading for some serious difficulties. And I don't think it's a matter of months. I think it's literally a matter of weeks, or maybe even days, where we need to get answers, for example, on where South African Airways are going to get their money from. Because this week, the business rescuers must either accept the plan and declare the plan being accepted, and that means that they must get money. Tito Mboweni is saying, no, he's not going to give money, but Pravin Gordhan seems to be saying, yes, Tito Mboweni is going to give them the money. I don't know. Nobody knows where the money is going to come from. But we're heading for some serious difficulty in South Africa, there's no doubt.
Okay, there's another, because when we sort of what we referred to earlier, Charles Adams said, Judge Dennis Davis has said that whites own between 60 to 70% of South African wealth. If we consider that the income ratio between white black is 5 to 1, how can we morally disagree with the redistribution of wealth? Okay, we've got
Can I react to that, Linda?
Yes, please.
Let me react to that. And again, I don't want to give it a color, but let me give you some numbers that I've done. I've done some calculations on the fiscal accounts, for example. Now, the South African fiscus is the most redistributive fiscus in the world. The fiscus is the state. That is my expertise. I analyze all the different revenue items, the state spending, and all the like. So the fiscus in South Africa is big. The tax burden in South Africa is very, very high, and the tax system in South Africa is exceptionally progressive. So the people actually paying the taxes are not the people getting most of the benefits. And I can calculate it to the last cent on how much you pay and what you get back for that. But suffice to say is that the state is exceptionally redistributive in South Africa. So they take a lot of money from the producers and they give that primarily, after they've taken their chunk, of course, whatever is left, they give it primarily to the poor. The problems in South Africa is not redistribution. Everybody accepts that. We can't do more than what we're doing at the moment, because that means that we have to increase taxes, and there simply isn't move. There isn't the room to move to increase taxes, and we can discuss the various taxes if we want to. The real issue in South Africa is where the money goes to. Now, we know the money is misappropriated. We know a lot of the money is simply stolen. But very importantly, people quite often forget about this, is that the money is badly spent. The biggest expense item for the Minister of Finance is education. Now, we spend more on education than most countries in the world, but the quality of our education is not only bad, it is of the worst in the world. So that's the issue that we need to address. It's not taking from the rich and give to the poor. We do that. We do that in overdrive already in South Africa. It's the way, it's the quality of spending in South Africa. That's the issue. And that is a political issue. We need to get competent people to spend the money better. And we don't have competent people. We've got cadres, and we've got a government that's more interested in living off the state, living off the economy of South Africa, and not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that's provide quality education. That's one example, and there are many other examples as well.
Hey, Gerhard, do you want to comment on what's been said now, or can I go on to more questions?
Yeah, I don't know what the divide is. I know what obviously we pay in taxes, and the fact that our money is squandered. You know what the problem is? Excluding a portion of the economy that is playing a vital role. If a businessman tells you that he sells an item to a particular person, a middleman, for 25,000 rand, that by the time that reaches the SOE, that item costs 200,000 rand. That is what's happening. This economy that you want to exclude will be included, but when it gets to the end user, the price is 10 times higher. That's brought SOEs to their knees. So it's not buying the best product at the best price. And we mustn't generalize. And the fact that we fall into the race trap is, well, I was sort of lured into that trap. But that is what's happening. I think you can continue with your next question, Linda.
Okay. Right. Well, everybody, there's a lot of questions about using the pension funds. So here's a question from, let me just see who it was. Liz Kluver says, if the government's budget shortfall is plus minus 700 billion, how much of pensioners' money will need to be prescribed, and for how long might this last? Well, on the initial policy of the ANC doesn't quite say prescribed assets described right now. They say it's still a discussion, but that's, people think that's where it's heading. Dawie?
Yes, Linda, yes, I've got those numbers. Let me give you some of these numbers. The total fiscal deficit of the state this year is probably going to be in a region closer to 800 billion, in fact. And that is approximately 15% of GDP. The savings in South Africa. Now, let's just look at the plain, straightforward macroeconomic numbers. The numbers in South Africa is that we save approximately 15% of our income. 15% of GDP is saved. The state's borrowing is also 15% of GDP. So the state borrows all this money, and about 300 billion of that is spent on capital. That means that the state is borrowing 500 billion in long-term money that they're going to spend on short-term current expenditure. Put that differently, that is like using your mortgage to pay your groceries. You're going to pay off on that mortgage for many, many years to come still. So the state is actively destroying 500 billion rands of capital that they're going to destroy in the current financial year. All right, so it's very clear that we ran out of savings. There simply is not savings available anymore in South Africa. And we're simply not investing enough in South Africa. And that's not all the cash that is required. We need money for Eskom. Eskom needs at least 250 billion rand. Apparently, we're going to get another 10, 11 billion rand for South African Airways. Now, I don't know where the money is going to come from. And that inevitably means that we have to make more use of other sources. Now, the other sources, of course, they are basically two other sources. Remember, we cannot increase taxes anymore for various reasons, or hardly can we increase taxes. And the only other two sources are, firstly, getting money from abroad, like we're probably going to try to do, getting from the IMF, or secondly, get money from the savers that already has saved a lot of money, like, for example, the pension funds. And I think it's becoming, we've painted ourselves into a corner where it's become inevitable. If we go on like this, if we don't cut back on state spending dramatically, then we don't have a choice but to start raiding the pension funds as well. Now, it is not official yet. They did mention they want to change so-called Section 28 of the Pension Fund Act, making it easier for pension funds to invest in infrastructure. And I guess South African Airways can be classified as infrastructure. But the problem is that it may become compulsory. And I do believe, yes, if we continue on this trajectory, the money must come from somewhere, and the only pot of gold left is that of the pension funds, and I believe eventually that will be part of that as well. You're muted, Linda.
I should know better. There's a question from Robert Heckley. He says, is it even legal to force pension funds to fund SOEs?
It's easy. Pension funds can do that already. In fact, they are doing that. In the case of, for example, the Government Employment Pension Fund, they own nearly 100 billion rands worth of Eskom bonds already. So it's happening all the time. And in fact, I have nothing wrong. I can't find anything wrong with a pension fund investing in a state-owned enterprise. It's good. It should happen like this. The problem is, provided that they do that because of very good reasons, and very good reasons are that it's a secure investment and you get a proper return. But that's not going to happen. It's not a secure investment, and you're going to be forced into investing into investments that are not very good, giving you good returns, and it's very high risky kinds of investments. But yes, indeed, as things stand, pension funds already provide loans to state-owned enterprises.
Okay, this is a question that Gerhard could possibly answer from David Cerebro. He says, what's the possibility of civil unrest due to the employment of millions that will be starving? And he might be able to answer it from a business point of view, the possibility of looting. Are they worried about that?
You know, if people will start getting hungry and desperate, and there's no prospects of getting out of this, I think that the prospect of civil unrest is highly likely. I mean, that's crime. Crime is not civil unrest, but it's already an element of people that cannot find work anywhere else. Begging and crime is another form, but it's not unrest. But I think that we're facing that type of thing. But I think it's a huge problem for government as well. I mean, I've seen video material yesterday of what's happening in the City Council of Pretoria very recently. Looting by their own staff at a very large scale. And so, you know, we were talking about large-scale retrenchments, and you know, the bigger problem is not only the poor, but when the middle class, when they will start being affected by what's happening, then you get a different. When they get desperate, things may actually accelerate quite fast.
Okay, Dawie, your camera is also back on. There's a question for you from Peter XT, and I think definitely for you. You mentioned earlier that we are going to the IMF. We've already accepted one loan. What about quantitative easing for South Africa, he says?
Yeah, let me just make a comment about the IMF. I think it's important. In fact, we're in the process of getting the loan. It's not been approved as far as I know. The loan amount is close to about 100 billion rand. And it's a so-called rapid financing instrument. It's something that's relatively easy to get. But just understand how the whole process works. We go to the IMF. Maybe let me just make this comment. We have close to R1 trillion worth of dollars and gold and other forex available at the South African Reserve Bank. So the Reserve Bank, it's got 900 billion foreign exchange already available at the South African Reserve Bank. We don't have a shortage of reserves or of dollars. But remember now, if you go to the IMF, and you borrow X amount of dollars, in this case 4.7, if I remember correctly, $1 billion, nearly 100 billion rand. So you borrow 100 billion rands worth of dollars, and you bring it into South Africa and you give it to the South African Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank then convert those dollars, and you borrow it, by the way, at 1% roughly. That's the exchange rate at the IMF. So you give it to the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank then convert it into 100 billion rands worth of rands and give it to the government to spend. And they will obviously spend this money on all these silly things that they spend their money on. But eventually that 100 billion rands will go into the economy. That will mean that the liquidity in the economy will increase. There will be a huge increase in the amounts of rands slushing around in the economy, and that will make monetary policy very inefficient. We currently have a money market shortage of approximately 50 billion rand, which the Reserve Bank wants to maintain. And in order to make sure that monetary policy remains effective, the Reserve Bank will have to sell certain financial instruments to drain that liquidity out of the financial markets, probably at the price of about, say, 5 or 6% or so. And then the cost of this borrowing will be on the South African Reserve Bank's income statement. So don't for one moment think that the answer is that we're simply going to get dollars and all the problems will be fixed. All you're going to do, you don't need dollars in order for the Reserve Bank to create rands. All they need to do is just buy government bonds, and that's so-called quantitative easing. And that's indeed what they have been doing. But the Reserve Bank doesn't want to admit that they're doing quantitative easing. They say they're simply adding to the liquidity because there were some liquidity blockages. And the past 3 months, they've bought first just over 10 billion per month, and last month in June they bought just over 5 billion. So in total they have approximately 35 billion that they've bought bonds on the secondary market, in the bond market. And the Reserve Bank is absolutely adamant this is not quantitative easing, it's simply an attempt to make sure that there's sufficient liquidity in the financial markets. But that's an excellent question, because the question is eventually how much pressure will be put on the Reserve Bank to do more of this. And I believe a lot of pressure. In fact, there was already talk about changing the mandate of the Reserve Bank and nationalization and so on. So we're not doing real quantitative easing, just a little bit of quantitative easing. It is a slippery slope, and the Reserve Bank is trying to withdraw from that. But I have no doubt that over time there's going to be more pressure on the Reserve Bank to do more of that, and the eventual outcome of more quantitative easing for a country like South Africa is very, very high levels of inflation.
Well, this is a follow-up to that from Ivo Fracture. He said, is it not inevitable that we'll have to just print money irrespective of the consequences?
That's
there has been calls
exactly.
from that.
Yeah. Remember, maybe I can just explain something that's interesting about monetary policy. Monetary policy is a little bit like a string. You can pull it, but you can't push on it. If people are borrowing too much money, you can pull it and you can increase interest rates until people start borrowing money, until money becomes so expensive that they simply don't borrow. But you can't force people to borrow money by lowering interest rates. And in a way, that is where we are at the moment. People are not borrowing money because they're scared, they're uncertain, and the demand for credit is not there. But if you quantitative easing creates or what we call base money or high-powered money, and it's money waiting to be lent out and borrowed in the economy, and the second round effect of that is then the inflation. But we first need an increase in the demand for credit before we will see that. Countries like, for example, the Americans, they've created massive amounts of money, but also people don't borrow this money, and that's why they don't see inflation, or don't see inflation yet. But I believe that inflation is going to become a significant problem over the next couple of years internationally, and probably, I would say, within less than 2 years, we're going to see inflation really accelerating in South Africa as well.
Okay, we'll sort of less away from economics now, but we probably will get that back to that. There is some other questions for you and some of business opportunities in this low growth model that we have at the moment. Let's just ask Gerhard this question. It's about the expropriation of land, and it comes from Rosemary Sanderson. And she says, how would businesses be impacted by possible expropriation of land? Is it likely, and how will it also impact employers, which you represent?
Well, you know, the ANC, this whole expropriation of land issue was thrust upon the on the president, and he started mentioning it as well, and he's driving the agenda faster than anybody else. Now, you know, one part of the belief is that it's not eventually going to happen, that it will happen in a way that it won't be that dramatic. That's the first thing. You know, we don't know if it happens, how it will happen, but what we do know, it opens the door. Once you trigger this process, then it's put us on a very dangerous path. And it's not only the expropriation of land, that includes everything, all it's not just lands, it's houses, it's businesses, it's everything. So it's not the land, it's a house as well. So I think we live in the hope that he's not going to realize, that the politicians will understand that once you start with this process, you're on a very, very slippery slope. And so that's all I can say. We hope it doesn't happen, because when it starts happening, things will go downhill very quickly.
Okay, Dawie, there's some more questions for you. This one is about the sin taxes. Dawie would, and this comes from Oratile Tlabane, Dawie, would higher excise duties or the sin taxes be a better way to reduce consumption of liquor and cigarettes with the added benefit of adding to the fiscus?
Okay, let me just make a comment.
At the moment, whenever everything is discussed, we discuss booze and cigarettes in South Africa. It seems to be inevitable.
That's important. Not that it's going to affect you, me, Elena, but it's important to talk about that. Remember, one of the requirements for a good tax system, a very important requirement, is the requirement of neutrality. And what that means is that you should not use a tax to get people to do more or less of something. So the tax system should be as close as possible to being neutral. Now, there's a long theoretical debate behind it, but basically the idea is to have a tax system that do not affect people, or affect people as little as possible. And that is exactly why sin taxes are used, because the idea of a sin tax is to force people to consume less, in this case, to smoke less or to drink less. So that's the theory behind it. And of course, politicians use this income then to spend on all sort of things. But the excuses is that they want to change our habits, which of course is just an excuse, because I was sure they don't care a bit about anything of this. They're more interested in the money that they're going to generate. And also keep in mind, whenever you levy a tax with a certain purpose, like for example the tax on plastic bags, is the idea was to use this tax for certain things, to create facilities to look after waste disposal and stuff like that, which never happened. So another important point is, whenever you levy a tax that is earmarked on something, it becomes part of the pot. What is happening currently in South Africa is that we have taxes on cigarettes and on alcohol, and because it has been banned, all that you're doing is you're simply supporting the illegal trade in cigarettes and in alcohol. Now, I can tell you, I've heard, this is just rumors, I'm not sure about this, but I've heard apparently you can get cigarettes and you can get booze. It's much more expensive. And what is happening at the moment now, we are simply making life very, very easy for the illegal trade in cigarettes and alcohol, and they are establishing themselves at the moment very, very nicely. And once we're allowed to buy cigarettes and alcohol again, it's going to be much more difficult to get rid of those illegal guys again. And on top of all of that, we're losing many, many billion rands of tax revenue that could have been used for something else. So I'm afraid this is another example of the wrong kind of policies that are being implemented by government.
Gerhard, do you want to comment on that, with how businesses are affected by this?
Well, the booze industry, so to speak, employs hundreds of thousands of employees. That's very big, and cigarettes less so, but it impacts directly. I mean, with the latest alcohol ban, that morning people got up and a few 100,000 people were out of a job immediately, and so yeah, that's huge. That's huge, and these businesses takes a hit which will take years to recover from. So you know, it just doesn't make economic sense. But this is the whole thing with the lockdown. You know, the remedy becomes worse than the original problem that we're having, and I don't think that they really, and I'm talking about government, really understand the predicament we find ourselves. I think they're a bit detached from what's happening on the ground.
Okay, before we get to sort of a more positive tone, if people say, are there opportunities in this climate? There's Gillian Grobler who says, well, we know where the problem starts and ends with politicians. Is it not time for civil society to stop paying rates and taxes into municipalities and rather put it into trust for correct use? Dawie, you're nodding. Would you like to go for that one?
Well, first of all, I'm not in favor of a tax boycott. For various reasons. One important reason, one that you start with that, you're not going to stop it. And I don't think it's practical. I don't think we will be able to do that in any event. But having said that, it is very, very clear that we're seeing a tax revolt already. The toll roads is a good example of that. People not paying tolls. If you look at, there's something called the elasticity of tax receipts or the elasticity of taxes or tax revenue, and it's very clear, and that simply tells you if the economy grows by 1%, tax revenue is supposed to go by 1% or a little bit more, and you can see in the current environment the tax revenue is not going up at the same rate at which the economy is growing, and that tells me that taxpayers are very aggressively structuring their tax affairs, or put differently, they're evading taxes. On the local authority level, the local authorities are so mismanaged. I mean, 75%, 80% of the local authorities are financially totally mismanaged. Just have a look at the Auditor General's report, for instance, and it is possible to legally withhold some of your local taxes. So do some research, and I do know of certain local authorities that actually do that. So maybe my advice to people is not to evade taxes or not to not pay taxes. Stick within the law, make sure that you follow the law and you pay all the taxes that you are required to pay. But I also advise people to pay only what you are required to pay and to try to legally pay as little tax as possible.
Gerhard?
Yeah. I'm here. Yeah, I agree with Dawie that I don't think a tax revolt is really possible, and it is, once you started, it's just extremely dangerous. But you know, I don't know how to do any of these things. You know, people are very upset what's happening. You know, our offices countrywide are closed to a very large extent. Everybody's working from home at this moment. That's still the case. And our water and lights, electricity accounts have increased by 50% during this period. And our offices are closed. And there's simply no way to address it. It is so ineffective. So we will get to the point that unless they get their act together, this is something that will start happening. And then there will be a point where people simply can't pay, which is already the case. People are using you know, illegal use of electricity simply because they can't afford it. Well, for some at least, that is the excuse, and I think it's valid. But it's becoming too expensive, and then you force good citizens into illegal activities. That's the danger. It is for us that still can't afford these things. You know, we don't go that far. But you've never been to the point where you say, I simply can't pay it, and I've got to revert to illegal practices in order to survive.
Okay, yeah, I agree, and that's kind of a slippery slope. They have found that once people don't pay, like for electricity, they do not get into the rhythm or habit of paying. Dawie, can we end this on sort of a positive note from somebody, if there is anything positive to be found. This is from Johann Schnettler. He says, where do you see opportunities in the next 1 to 3 years, given the low growth estimation? And possibly Gerhard could comment as well. Is there any positive opportunities at the moment for businesses?
Yeah, okay, Linda, well, I'm an asset manager, and what I advise people to do is stay in South Africa and make use of the opportunities in South Africa. And there are many opportunities in South Africa, and I want to point some of those out. But it's very important to take a substantial portion of your portfolio out of South Africa. And that's what I do for my clients. I manage money locally and internationally, and I encourage people to take money out of South Africa. But I also encourage people to make use of the opportunities in South Africa. Now, let me give you an example. On the bond market, the capital market in South Africa give you a return of approximately 10% on, say, 10-year paper, roughly. Compare that to the Germans. In the case of the Germans, if you want to lend money to the German government, you have to pay the German government before they are prepared to take your money. Now, that is usually can be used as a proxy. That can be used as a proxy of the underlying potential capacity of the South African economy, and that means there's a lot of money to be made in South Africa. The problem is that you have to understand what is going on. Whatever industry you are in, you have to understand the risks, and you have to be able to manage those risks. And one of the risks certainly is cash flow. So that's just the starting point. But even before this crisis and before the current troubles in which we are in, there were certain trends very apparent. And some of these trends are that the world has, economies has been moving more into the tertiary industries, away from primary and away from secondary, more into the tertiary industries. And remember, some of the businesses that were traditionally considered as being part of the primary industry or the secondary industry, like agriculture, for instance, actually are part of the tertiary industry today. A geneticist is a very good example. So look for the tertiary industry, firstly. Secondly, look for services, kinds of services, not all kinds of services. Certain services are certainly under a lot of pressure. Having a restaurant, for example, is one of those examples, but other services are doing very, very well. I mean, Gerhard and myself and Linda, all of us, we're talking on this now. I mean, this part of the economy is functioning because we're part of the service industry, and also very important, it's a digitizable business in which we are talking to one another now, and that's another thing. So that's the things that you need to look for. So if you want to do business in South Africa, the first thing is make sure that you're physically safe in a safe physical environment. Secondly, make sure you have the skills to participate in a modern economy. And thirdly, make sure you have a connection, an internet connection that works, a proper connection. And it really doesn't matter where you are. You can be anywhere in the world. If those three things are present, you can do a business. And look at the tertiary industry, and like I've mentioned, service industry, and the digitizable kind of businesses.
Well, that's nice and positive. Gerhard, is there anything positive in the fact that TERS, the Temporary Employee Relief Fund from the UIF, has now been extended to August? So I've just got that question. I thought that's important.
I'm not sure whether that's the case, Linda. The people discussing this matter at Netlag was surprised to hear that. The message I get, it was only meant for those industry that's still not allowed to function. But we've in fact sent out something this morning where we announced that it is open until middle August. But we said we need to see the government gazette first, and it might be that the minister spokesperson got this totally wrong. I'm not sure. There's the two versions, but if it is, it's good news. I don't know, they were already stretched. Just in respect of the payment. They've paid about 85%, 86% of the April payments, about 70% of the May payments, and they are about 20% of the June payments. So at least there's progress. But just a bit on good news, we are overwhelmed by bad news, and everything you read every day is bad news, because it's easier to write about bad news, and I think the government give us a lot of reason to write about bad news, but reading all this stuff requires a huge amount of personal leadership, where you need to digest the stuff and do not allow that to put you off, to make you unproductive and uncreative. so take note of these things, prepare and plan for it, and then focus on the opportunities that's lying around. And I think we are actually, you know, you know, I don't want to venture on Dawie's area, but when markets go down, that's when people want to get into them. When people get out of the market, that's your time to get into the market. And that's also happening here. There are definitely opportunities, but if you focus too much, if your attention is caught up by all the struggles that we are facing, you might just miss some of them.
Microphone back on. Dawie Roodt just said I could share his email address with the people who were on the webinar today. That's really dangerous, but I'm going to do that. Just as quick, we sort of ending now. A quick 1 minute from both. You know, all about the future and where we're going and how optimistic or pessimistic you are about it.
Is that to me, Linda?
Yes, to both of you. Just a quick 1 minute, or literally 30 seconds, please, each.
Okay, well, the issue is that there are some issues that needs to be resolved. I did say that we've got some leadership issues. We don't know who's in charge of the ANC. We must fix these sort of things. Is the president in charge? Is Magashule in charge? We just don't know. So that's the first issue that needs to be resolved. The second one has to do with the ideology. What do we stand for? What's the plan? We don't know what it is. And then thirdly, that I believe that there's a conflict within the tripartite alliance, and I believe the tripartite alliance will fall apart as well. And that's a good thing. Let that happen. So that's a first hurdle that we as South Africans. So, but I advise people, go get a comfortable seat, go get a big bowl of popcorn, go get a nice big mug of chocolate, sit back and enjoy, because this is going to be spectacular, and we're going to see quite a nice couple of fights playing out in front of us over the next couple of months in the country.
Thank you, Dawie. Gerhard, quick 20 seconds almost. Just,
yeah,
you want to say anything else?
Even positive people, you know, being positive, nobody can always be positive. Even positive people venture between moments of being discouraged to very positive. But you know, this is the situation we find ourselves in, and we've got to deal with that. We've got to play the hand that we have. And you know, personally, I think it's just wonderful to be part of this very eventful place where we can live.
Oh, well, at least we've all got that in common. Love South Africa. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Dawie Roodt. Thanks, Gerhard Papenfus. And bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Linda. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Linda. Goodbye.
Bye.